Hello, welcome back to Unreal Engine. All right, this is the most exciting part of the series for me, at least. We're going to bring the dragon to life in Unreal Engine. It's going to breathe fire, it's going to go under the control of the player and walk around and do other kinds of stuff. Okay, so before we start, I'm gonna say what we need for this tutorial, this demo. Okay, now remember we generated the ambient occlusion and the normal maps for the dragon. So these are brought in and dragged into the project as textures. Okay, so we have the ambient occlusion map texture and the normal map texture in this project. We also have the original dragon atlas texture, this guy, that's also dragged in, of course, because we need it for the base decal texture of the dragon. Okay, so here's the base decal texture, here is the normal map texture, and here is the ambient occlusion map texture. Okay, next we also need the dragon's JSON file, and in order to do that, what you do is you right click, okay, move to creature, move your mouse to the creature submenu, and you can see a creature animation asset. You click on that and it's going to allow you to select a JSON file, and that comes in as a creature animation asset. If we double click on it, you can see all the animations there that are associated with that dragon in the animation asset. Okay, so you need that in order to bring your character in. So we need a creature animation asset. Once you're done with that, let's select the dragon. You can see that it's a blueprint. So it's really just a regular actor that I've converted into a blueprint. Okay, so you convert that into a blueprint. So let's take a look at the dragon's blueprint. So let's open up the blueprint editor. Before we even look at the nodes, let's take a look at the dragon. All right. Okay, we'll get to the material of the dragon later on, but I want to show you how the overall structure of the dragon is set up in Unreal Engine. So at the top is the root object, dragon blueprint. There's really nothing exciting going on there. It's default scene, root 1, who cares, okay? And then what we do is we add a creature mesh component. If you click on add component and you search for creature, you can see creature mesh, okay? So that's essentially just a creature mesh. Now let's take a look at the properties of the creature mesh component. All right, so crucially, we have the material set to dragon material. More on that in a moment. Okay, and also we have the creature animation asset set to the dragon animation asset. Remember that JSON file that we created? We created an animation asset out of that. We're pointing to that, to the dragon animation asset. Okay, so these are just the two things that are required to set up a creature animation object in Unreal Engine. That's really all it is. All right, and I've scaled it up uniformly by 6 to make the dragon larger. And that's all it is. Okay, so the next thing we're going to take a look at is the material setup of this dragon. So let's double click on the material and let's see what's going on. All right, so a couple things that are happening for this character, this dragon character. So first off, we have the base decal texture over here, this guy, right? He's going into the dragon material. Now let's take a look at what a dragon material is before I go back to the base decal texture. The dragon material's blend mode is set to masked. Okay, we need this because we need the opacity channel. We want it to be transparent because it's a PNG, right? So we have it to masks. Okay, now once we set it to the mask component, we pipe the original decal texture sample, we pipe the RGB values into the base color, that makes sense, and then we pipe the alpha component, the alpha channel, into the opacity mask. And if you do just that, that's good enough to set up a base creature material with no lighting. If you don't care about lighting, that's really all you need. You're done. Okay? But we do care about lighting because we've generated those two fancy normal and ambient occlusion maps. So what's next for us? Well, the next thing we're going to do is to set up its metallic property. So I have in the metallic input, I've connected it to a constant, a material constant of 0.7. It's some kind of a metallic material. And I've also set the specularity of the dragon as 0.35. So these two parameters will determine how the dragon reflects light, right, off its surface. Okay, and then finally I have the roughness. It's not entirely a rough skin. We wanted to reflect and have some kind of sharpness, a sheen to the skin of the dragon. So I've set the roughness to 0.3. You can play around again with these parameters to get the look you want, but these are the ones I settled on. Okay, there's no hard and fast rules for this. Okay, so once you're done with that, if you do that, it still looks kind of boring because there's no normal maps, right? It still looks kind of flat. So we have to put in the normal maps. So how do we put the normal map? So look at this. So here's a texture sample. This is the normal map of the dragon. We created a new texture sample in the material network. Okay, and what we do is the sampler type set to normal. It has to be normal because we're interpreting this as a normal map. All we need to do is connect up the RGB components to the normal channel of the material, and we're done. Okay, and similarly for ambient occlusion, we do the same thing. We connect up the RGB components to the ambient occlusion. That's really all it is. And once you're done with this material, that is, you set up all the different nodes. Take a look at how it's set up. That's really all it is. You set up these different nodes. We go back to the dragon. Let's close this window. We go back to the dragon, and you basically get this look, right? This really cool look where it almost looks 3D because we have normal maps and ambient occlusion maps connected into the material of the dragon. All right, and I have a couple lights going on here. Let me see. I have, believe I have two lights, at least two lights, 2 point lights lighting up the scene. Okay, to show off the normal maps of the dragon, to show off the almost 3D-like look of the dragon. Right, and you can again move the lights around to get the look you want, get the reflections you want of this dragon. Okay, so that concludes the material and creature mesh component setup, the blueprint setup of the dragon. Let's play with the dragon, and then I will get to the actual logic, actual gameplay logic of the dragon. Now, to move forwards, I press D. He moves forwards. To move backwards, I press A. And then to shoot, to launch the flames, I press S. Look at that, it's pretty cool. Okay, so you're probably wondering how that's done, and I'm going to show you right now. So let's stop the demo and click on the dragon. Again, let's open up the blueprint in the blueprint editor, and let's take a look at the event graph. All right, now all the different events or nodes or logic have been nicely commented. Sorry, so it should be really easy for you to examine and investigate how this was done. But let me walk you through it. Okay, so first things first, let's take a look at the initialization. That is the event begin play event. This is when the blueprint is first fired up and is ready. That's the dragon is ready to play. Okay, the first thing, the most important thing you need to do is to enable input. You have to enable input because we're going to be using the keyboard controls to control the dragon to make it spout flames, and you have to set this blueprint to be aware of any user input. So we're going to enable the input, okay, and we have to grab a player controller, player index of 0, that's 0, that's us, okay? So connect this up to enable the input of the dragon, okay? So once that's done, the next thing we're going to do, this is where it calls into one of the creature plugins functions. We want to set the dragon's animation to an idle animation. So it starts off at idle, okay? So we call this function set blueprint blend active animation, okay, with the name of ground_idle. This means the dragon is going to switch to the idle animation. Now there's also this factor thing. What's that? This is a blending animation. That is, it's going to smoothly blend into the target animation. So a factor of 1 means it's going to jump directly to that animation. Now we'll see in a moment how we're going to play around this factor. In the other cases, when the dragon has gone past begin play and you're actually controlling the dragon, we want the dragon to smoothly blend to a next animation, to another animation, to another target animation. We don't want it to jump, right? We want to smoothly blend to give more of an organic effect. So we're going to have a factor of less than 1. The factor is a value between 0 and 1, okay? So you can play around with that. When you have a factor of 1, this means that the animations can switch immediately to the target animation. In this case, it switches immediately to ground idle, okay? So the dragon's in the idle phase at the beginning of the game, okay? And then we have this variable called dragon state. You'll see in a moment what we're doing, but we have this public variable, this variable on this blueprint, we're going to use it to control some internal gameplay states of the dragon, and also the speed of the dragon. That's also used later on to determine the walking and the movement speed. And that's all it is. That's the initialization phase of the dragon. We enable the input, okay? We set its idle animation, and then we set some variable states. That's all it is, okay? So that is the initialization. Now, let's talk about the input, the keyboard input. That's the most important part, okay? You notice we have input keys for A, D, and S, right? So A is going to move the dragon in a reverse fashion. It's going to go walk backwards. D, the dragon is going to move forwards. And S is going to spout flames. Okay, so let's take a look at what's going on. So when you click on A, what we do is we call this function called switch dragon state. All right, and when you release the key, we also call the same function with different input parameters. All right, so we call switch dragon states for A. When the key is pressed down, we set the state to 2, and we set the speed to negative 0.2. It's negative 0.2 because it's moving backwards, right, to the left. And then when we release it, we set the state back to 0, the default state, and the speed to 0 because it's not moving. Now let's actually take a look at the function switch dragon state to see what's going on. So double click on that. Okay, so here is switch dragon state. And what this does, okay, it's actually not that complicated. The first thing it does is we have to determine what type of animation we're going to play based on the input state, right? So let's take a look at this box over here. Now, when the state is 0, okay, we're making an array, a string array. In fact, when the state is 0, we are going to use the ground idle animation. Makes sense? Because that's the default state. When the state is 1, we're going to make it have a ground walk. That means it's going to walk to the right. And then when the state is 2, we're going to make it do a ground reverse. And then when state is 3, it's going to be the fire animation or the flame animation. Okay, so that's all really what this logic here does, and it gets sent or piped into the function we saw before, which is the set blueprint blend active animation, right? So we determine the name of the state, name of the animation that we want to based on the state, sorry, and then we pipe it into the name of this function, okay? And this is where the factor comes in. See, the factor is now 0.02. This means it's going to slowly or smoothly blend from whatever it's trying to do. It could be a flame animation, it could be an idle animation. It's blending from its current state into the target state with a factor of 0.02. So it's going to smoothly blend in, which will look really nice instead of jumping to it. Okay, so we determine the animation name based on the input state, and then we call this function to switch to the new animation, the set blueprint blend animation. Okay, and then once we're done with that, the next thing we're going to do is set the dragon speed. Remember, we have an input parameter speed in for this function. We're going to set that too. So if the dragon needs to move to the right, it's going to set the speed left or idle, whatever it is. We set the speed of the dragon, and we also set the dragon state. That's another internal variable that we're setting. Okay, so just to repeat myself, we set the correct animation to target to, we set the speed, and we set the state. Okay, these are the three things that are going on in this function, and we're done. We return. Okay, so let me close this. Let's go back to the event graph, and that's really all it's doing. So you can see for A, we're gonna set the state to 2 because we're going reverse, right? And then once we release it, we set the state to 0, and then we set the appropriate speeds too. When we're reversing, our speed is negative 0.2, and when we're idle, our speed is 0, right? And so we do the same thing for D, and we do the same thing for S. S is the flame mode. It's the dragon is shooting flames. So we set the state to 3, but we're not moving, right? Because it's just standing on the ground shooting flames. So the speed is 0. Okay. So this concludes the keyboard input or player input portion of the dragon gameplay. All right. And then let's move on to the final portion, which is the tick, the event tick. This method is triggered, or this callback's triggered every time we need to update the character. Okay, and this is where we do the actual logic of moving the dragon and possibly spawning the fire particles, the fire flames. So let's take a look. So on the event tick handler, okay, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to attempt to move this dragon. So there's a move dragon function, and then we're going to attempt to spawn any flames if required. It won't spawn flames if the state isn't set correctly. It's not the valid state. All right. So let's take a look at the move dragon function first. So double click on that. Okay. So here is the move dragon function. All right. And what it does, the first thing it does is it tries to set the actor's location. So we're going to try to move the dragon either to the left or to the right. Okay? And in order to do that, we're going to update its location. Okay? So what we're going to do is first we grab the world location of the actor, our dragon. We grab it. Okay, that returns a vector. Okay? Then we make a separate vector based on the dragon's speed. Now this separate vector has y and z components set to 0 because it's not moving up and down, but it's really moving just horizontally. So we connect the x component to the dragon speed. See this thing over here? And remember, in the previous cases, we're setting the dragon speed to either negative, positive, or 0. Okay, so this will determine the displacement vector of the dragon. Then we pipe these two guys into a vector addition node. So this will add or increment, if you will, the new displacement vector, the movement displacement vector with the original location of the dragon. So we pipe those in, they add up together, this will move the dragon, and then we set the dragon to the new location. That's all it is. Okay? So this function essentially just moves the dragon based on the dragon's speed. Now, of course, you can do something fancier. I'm already imagining you could probably connect up the dragon to a rigid body and apply an impulse or an acceleration of force. That's fine too. For the purposes of this demo, we're going really simple, just to show you some basic gameplay logic and how it was done. Okay, but this is really all it does. Okay, so that's the move dragon function. Let's take a look at the spawn fire function. That one's really interesting too. This is where it launches the dragon's flame. Okay, so in spawn fire, the first thing we need to do before we spawn any fires, we should determine if we even need to spawn a flame in the first place, correct? So we have an if branch, a branch statement here, and this only launches the flames if the state is set to 3. Remember, we said state 3 is when the dragon launches flames, right? So we have a condition here, and only when it's equal to 3 do we actually bother with doing any of the particle stuff, launching the flame particles. Otherwise, if it's false, we just go straight to the return node and we're done. Nothing gets done. So in most cases, nothing happens in this function. In the case where the player is holding on the S key, right? If we take a look, let's go back to the nodes, the keyboard input nodes. In the case where the player is holding down the S key and the state is set to 3, let's go back. Then we hit the true branch of this if statement, this branch, this condition, and the first thing we're going to do, we're going to start launching the flame particles. But before that happens, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to grab the transform of the bones. We need to basically launch flames at along the bones of one of the dragon. Okay, so I happen to know it's actually bone 5, bone_5. Let me show you why. So let me launch creature, and I'm going to go to bone 5, which is this guy over here. Actually, if I go to the rigging mode, it's probably easier to tell. Right. So here's bone 5, this guy over here. See, bone 5? Right. So bone 5 is going to be a launch pad for the flames, if you will. We're going to launch it along the transform of bone 5. Now, if you launch it along bone 5, it might launch it at the base or at the tip. We want to launch it at the tip of the bone, correct? So because when the flames is spout out at the tip, okay? And so what's cool about the plugin is it has abilities for doing that. So what we do is we call the creature plugins function get blueprint bone xform, which will return you the transform of a particular bone of the dragon, okay? And make sure you check the world transform property, so it transforms the bone from local space to world space, okay? So check that one, and then the next thing you're going to do is to set the position slide factor. Okay, so this basically determines how far along the bone you're sliding before you want to launch the flames. Okay, so if you set it to a positive number, it's going to slide along the bone in a positive direction, and we want that because we want the flames to launch ahead of the bone, not at the base of the bone. That would be ridiculous, correct? So I set a position slide factor of 2.5, okay? And this will be our target position to launch our flames, okay? So this function will determine at what position we're going to launch the flames of the dragon. Once we're done with that, we break the transform, because again, this returns a matrix transform. We really only care about the location, the position of that transform. We don't really care about rotation on a scale, at least in this simple example, right? So we grab the location, and here's where we actually spawn the particle emitter of the dragon. So I pick the P fire, a flame particle, because that's what we're doing. Okay, and we pipe in the location from break transform, which is extracted from the bone transform of bone_5. Okay, so I pipe that into location. Okay, and that will spawn the flames of the dragon, and that's really all it is. Okay, so I've gone through all the different gameplay logic pieces of the dragon. That's really all it is for this demo or tutorial. And let's play it again and see what we get. So now, when I press A, I go backwards, reverse. Okay, when I press D, I go forwards. Notice how the animation is smoothly blended between each other. It doesn't just pop to snap to the next animation. It actually smoothly blends, right? And if I press S, I launch the flames. That's pretty cool. Okay, and this has all the 3D lighting effects, ambient occlusion effects, because we have normal maps, ambient occlusion maps in this dragon character. And notice how the flames are launching at the tip, or over the tip of the jaws, right? That's because of the position slide factor. I was using a 2.5 factor, in fact, for the bones, correct? So, for bone_5, actually, when I grab the X form of the dragon. So this concludes the tutorial on how we constructed this flame-breathing dragon all the way from creature, and then applied normal and ambient occlusion map and Sprite Bump, and brought it back to life in Unreal Engine. So I hope you enjoy this series of tutorials and have fun animating.